Hello and welcome to Moneylife. This is Sucheta Dalal. This week, we are going to discuss know your customer issues. Not what affects you and me. We live in urban areas. We have good internet connectivity. We are better off. All of us complain endlessly about the harassment of KYC. If this is our situation in metros and cities, can you even imagine what must be happening in rural India where network connectivity is patchy, distances are large, there are hardly any bank branches? You need to listen to what is happening and you need to lend your voice to make something happen. Life is tough for the poor in India. In fact, every few days, social media highlights the relentless struggles of India's marginalized communities due to caste discrimination, bonded labor, lack of healthcare facilities, inadequate infrastructure, and rampant corruption, exploitative interest rates. We read it, we feel sorry, we post an emoji, and we move on. From bankers to policemen, over the last 20 years, many have told us that the poor really bear the brunt of a heartless system, one that has remained largely unchanged for 77 years since India became independent. A decade ago, all this was supposed to have changed. We came up with what is called the JAM Trinity. JAM being Jan-Dhan account, linked to your Aadhaar number. Aadhaar was introduced, made mandatory, and of course the mobile. So with these three, life indeed changed for people in cities. Everybody has a mobile and things work. But this magic solution or magic bullet, which was supposed to deliver subsidies and social benefits, you have to remember that Aadhaar came into existence as giving a complete biometric ID, the only ID that they would ever need, to the poor people and marginalized people in India who apparently had no other ID. Unlike you and me, they had no PAN, driving license, passport. So Aadhaar was supposed to be their single ID. In fact, it's become their singular nightmare. The Prime Minister's website, of course, you can look at the link here, tells us how he went into mission mode and pushed people to get Jan-Dhan accounts. Millions got banking access, and this radically transformed lives and even made it to the Guinness Book of World Records for the most number of bank accounts opened in a week. This is a statement from the Prime Minister, which I'm showing you now. The JAM vision will serve as a bedrock for many initiatives to come. And for me, JAM is about achieving maximum value for every rupee spent, maximum empowerment for our poor, maximum technology penetration among our masses. The reality is vastly different. This mission mode approach meant that banks were given targets and they prioritized the targets and enrolled people into opening bank accounts. Documentation was not proper. Aadhaar was not biometrically verified by pinging it with the Unique Identity Authority. Instead, they just took printed Aadhaar. Aadhaar is not a card, it's a printout, right? Which you have to download from the website. So they took these printouts, entered numbers and names in whatever way, data entry was wrong, and did not bother with KYC. All that came later after people actually began to use those accounts, began to receive subsidies over there, children began to receive scholarships, and then banks slowly began to do KYC. When documents didn't match or authentication wasn't complete, they just froze the accounts. So there are inactive accounts, mercifully, if there's no money in them and have not been used, but many have been frozen after they have been used, after they have been linked to Narega cards, after they have been linked for scholarships, and the bankers really don't care. They say we are following RBI instructions. RBI in turn blames the finance ministry's money laundering rules, and nobody does anything because it affects ordinary middle class people. We have also been complaining. Moneylife has sent a memorandum to the RBI several years ago. We have had online campaigns. But imagine what happens in rural marginalized areas with little connectivity. Nobody knows, nobody even cares. these are supposed to be low-risk accounts. So why am I discussing it today? We have discussed it several years ago. We are discussing it today because it's now 10 years since the JAM Trinity was touted, and these have come in for re-KYC, which means complete know your customer identification has to be done all over again. You can only imagine the nightmare because there's large-scale freezing and shutting down of accounts. Banks are just freezing them by the thousands, pointing to RBI. People have written to RBI. Welfare economist Jan-Dhan, who works with marginalized people in Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh, has spoken to the RBI governor, has written to them. They have posted on X with case histories and videos. Nothing much has changed. The problem, in fact, is increasing. You notice the problem happening in Rajasthan as well. In fact, Mr. Dres has been highlighting this since 2018. Moneylife has written about it in 2018, shortly after we sent a memorandum. But because of the lack of a viable solution, the re-KYC now, after 10 years, has really increased the harassment and tragedy for the poor. What we need now is another mission mode initiative led by the Prime Minister to rectify these errors. It is a desperate situation, but help is nowhere in sight. In fact, surveys by Mr. Dres and a team of volunteer activists and economists have painted a grim reality. Elderly individuals relying on tiny pensions or 1,000 rupees, scholarships for school-going children, women depending on state welfare, all have money in accounts that are frozen and cannot access them. This happens because the JAM Trinity rests on two flawed assumptions. First, that every Indian can afford to have an active mobile connection and that there is sufficient network coverage even in rural areas, as well as infrastructure help. Remember, people don't even have food to eat. The government is continuing to give subsidized and free rations to over 80 crore people. And we expect them to have a mobile link to Aadhaar linked to their cards. It is not happening. Secondly, in the absence of adequate infrastructure, the process of updating and authentication itself becomes a punishment. People travel long distances, sometimes as much as 50 kilometers, just to access an Aadhaar center. This is called Pragya Kendras. This has happened in Jharkhand, documented in Chhattisgarh. They wait an entire day in a queue to get a token number, which says come back, not tomorrow, not the day after, but 2 months later, because there is no bandwidth, not at the bank, not at these centers. What does a Pragya Center do? They look at the identity documents. If there is a mistake, they are supposed to help sort out the updation process, asking for more documents. It's not easy. It's not easy for us. It is not easy for them. Now, after they provide a verification certificate, this has to be submitted to the bank, which then does the KYC, which gives 30 tokens a day. Imagine the income loss to people, the number of trips they make, and there is no clear resolution because it's not as though the Pragya Center says, oh, okay, you have this problem, I'll settle it. Not at all. In fact, many problems have no solution. So bank accounts have remained frozen for, believe it or not, as much as 3 years. Here are some examples. There is Sora Oran of Danamunji. She queued up all day to receive a token for KYC appointment on December 27th, which is 2 months later. She has a family of 5, 3 accounts are frozen. Now, if re-KYC is not completed at the end of December, these accounts will remain frozen. Like I said, a banker says he issues 3 tokens a day and he has a backlog of 1,500 applications. That means everyone is going to wait at least 2 months for the KYC, even after they've got their verification done and if they've got a verification certificate from the Pragya Center. Urban accounts are similarly affected, but we have branches in the neighborhood. And if people were queuing up like this, there would have been such a public outcry, there would have been media coverage, there would have been pressure on the authorities to act. Who cares about what happens to the poor in rural India? They are disempowered and nobody notices. Now, why is it a bigger problem for the rural poor? Answer is quite revealing. Aadhaar, as you know, was championed by billionaire Nandan Nilekani as a unique biometric solution for marginalized Indians looking for formal identification. It was made mandatory. This is where the problems start. You have to have a biometric. Biometric and verification means you need technology, you need pinging to the UIDAI, and it doesn't work. Sometimes because their fingerprints aren't read, sometimes because there are no iris scans, and many times because there's no network coverage. So instead of doing this in the beginning, like I said, targets were met, second-hand data was used, and it has been downhill ever since, because each time there's a problem, they just throw out people or freeze their accounts because of inconsistencies. Now, what kind of inconsistencies? You may have a different spelling in a bank account, a different one on your Aadhaar card. Why? Because data entry operators translated your name differently. You have no control over it because the people who are standing in queue are not even literate. They don't even know what is there. It's only when an officer looks at it at a Pragya Kendra or at a bank, they tell them about spelling. Do these guys even know about how things are spelled on their cards? When someone is entering it, they probably just say their name in whichever their regional local language. So many inconsistencies have been thrown out between Aadhaar, bank account, job cards, PAN if they have one. Everywhere spellings are different, addresses are written differently. The same address may be half written on one identity and differently on another. So data inconsistencies is the first problem, differences in records. Biometric verification, because they are doing hard labor. They don't have nice fingerprints. Iris scans are not available. Internet access is spotty. Then negligence by banks. They entered whatever they wanted to do the biometric verification later. So enrollment was faulty, data entry was faulty. So there is mismatch and inconsistency. What do? Freeze the account. This affects access to all welfare schemes, ration supplies, this free ration, and subsidies linked to the Aadhaar account. Now, data entry errors is the third big problem, because data entry has happened here on our voting cards. We have ourselves gone back to get things changed. New errors are introduced. Imagine the kind of data entry operators that are there in rural India, whether they know the language, they're probably entering in English, and the mistakes are innumerable. Government is offering no solutions to this. Take some examples. Bhola Aran and Basantara, two residents of Kendra, their numbers misspelled on their Aadhaar card. It's one at the bank, another is Bhola, BHULA instead of BHOLA. One, the Basant, has an A missing in another. Sarita Oran, believe it or not, her name is listed as Archana on the Aadhaar card. Why? Nobody knows. She doesn't. The data entry operator was probably daydreaming of an Archana. It is Archana. Ashok Parihar of Latehar had to pay 150 rupees to an operator who promised him KYC would be done, because his children's money, their scholarship is lying frozen. Nothing happened. Money vanished. 150 is a lot of money for the poor. Sangeeta Devi paid 1,000 rupee bribe to a computer center to have mistakes in her Aadhaar card rectified. Now she has 2 children and a visually impaired husband. Their accounts are frozen. Their scholarships are frozen. Her children, in fact, cannot even get Aadhaar cards if they have to receive any money, unless she raises money to bribe the computer operator. Our billionaire philanthropists are nowhere on the scene when these things happen. Bhola Ram is another one. Wrongly spelled name. Added a U on his Aadhaar card. Don't ask me why. Many accounts are similarly frozen. Some mistakes are inconsistencies between the Narega card, the bank account, and the Aadhaar. Triple. All have to be changed, made 100% consistent. The banks know this is a problem. The banks know that there is no other basis on which you will correct it. What affidavits are you going to ask them? Who's going to certify anything? Is the process even spelled out? Who's going to acknowledge this is a mistake or which is the right one? There are no answers. This needs answers in mission mode. Mr. Dre's team conducted surveys. Some of them have thrown chilling data. 60% of households in some villages have at least one account frozen. In one case, 5 accounts of one household are frozen. The sheer volume of affected individuals reflects the magnitude of the crisis, but it is ignored. Like I said, even by the billionaires who are globally giving speeches about philanthropy and what you should leave for people. This is a problem they have created because they thought technology that works in Bangalore works in Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, and the more remote and rural parts of India. There is surely a need for reform. It requires empathy and it has to be results focused. KYC documentation is important. We do not want flouting of money laundering rules, but they have to have solutions. They have to understand the reality of India, its illiteracy, its poverty, its lack of connectivity, and then come up with solutions for these. These are low-risk people. They are struggling to survive. They are not your money launderers that you need to worry about. No person ought to be deprived of social benefits or their hard-earned earnings because of typos and data entry problems. We need practical solutions. In fact, long before a uniform civil code, we need empathy-driven reform on how our names and addresses are spelled. Do we have any consistency on street names, addresses, constant changes? You realize the horrors of constantly changing names of stations and streets. It's happening all the time for political reasons. Each time you need changes in your PAN, Aadhaar, voter ID, passport, driving license. And for these people, it means access to subsidies and to food. We cannot have it. It's time we start thinking about it. It's time we realize how names are mentioned. What is a middle name? Is it a second name given to you at birth? Or is it your father's name? Is it your husband's name? We have no consistency across India on any of these, but we want technology. We have made it mandatory. And if there is a problem, it's your problem because nobody really cares. This has to change immediately. It has to change first for the poor, then for us, because we are suffering as much. Now, if politicians in these 2 states that have been surveyed by Mr. Dres and his team, just Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh, if they use social media, they use their position in parliament to make a noise, maybe it would have got amplified a little bit. We have parliament opening in a couple of weeks. I hope this issue gets taken up. If you read about it, it's your duty also to amplify so that people know, so that we have a solution. If you agree, do subscribe and do share. This is a serious problem. It's India's problem and it needs solutions. Thank you.